So, anti-minimalism? Not exactly. I would just say that I'm on the fence. Welcome to This Life Reconsidered, and my name is Janina, where I focus on searching for the meaning in stuff. So join me on this journey and hit that sub button. So I have been noodling this video for a while, and I think it's in large part because when I started this channel, that was really focused on perspective and clarity and all the other stuff. A lot of the kind of videos that were coming to the top were all these kind of minimalism videos and a lot of people that create content in that space, which is interesting because I'm not necessarily a minimalism content creator. And that's not necessarily kind of my interest, but I find that some of the topics that I concentrate on are in that space. So it's logical. Now, with all that all said, I think that there's still a lot of content that continues to be created about why this is a really great way of life and all the other stuff. And I can completely appreciate that content, and I've seen some really, really good insights shared in some of that. Now, that said, I think that as I've watched a lot of that, and I've also kind of thought about how my perspective kind of fits in within that particular space, I've kind of realized that my personal thinking is kind of guided on a couple of key kind of like fundamentals. How I grew up, how I live life currently, and then also just kind of what the meaning of minimalism is, So those are three key different aspects there, and I'll save the first two for the last. Fundamentally, minimalism is this really great idea of just kind of being able to focus on living on what you absolutely need, and I think that there's a critical value in doing that, and I think that that's meaningful for a lot of people that can truly live and build a life around living with just the fundamentals, the basics, and constructing their life around that. And a lot of people, from what I can see online, have been able to do that very, very successfully. But when I think about the first two, right, like how I live my life now and then how I grew up kind of to a degree in a semblance of minimalism, right? So I grew up in inner city New York, and my parents, and while we were never destitute, we certainly didn't have everything.
A few moments later.
So I apologize. Where was I? So when I grew up in inner city New York, and while I never lacked for everything, my parents kind of had to struggle to kind of pull together what they were able to provide me. And I'm very, very grateful for that because they made sure that as long as everything was kind of, I had a roof over my head, we always had our utilities, I was always clothed, I was always clean. And that meant that I went with a lot of things that I went with a lot of, without frills. When I got that one big frill, that I knew took my parents everything, financially and stuff like that. And I can really, really appreciate the whole struggle that they had to get me that one rare, like, oh my gosh, really nice jacket that was on trend. And it took the whole year for them to kind of be able to plan for that, So because I grew up in that semblance of minimalism, and just living with what I really needed, and the realities of just growing up in the kind of environment I grew up in, with a lot of love, but also with a lot of, a lot of minimal. I think that as I got to a point in my adulthood in which I have started to kind of establish myself kind of professionally, and as a result have started to kind of generate, some kind of, financial ability to kind of start planning and getting things for myself and allowing myself to create the life around me that I want. It's not like I'm going out and shopping every weekend and I'm tearing up all these great stores and I'm racking up all these designer things, but I'm in a different place now where now if I want something, I can plan for it accordingly and give myself the ability to kind of make sure that I can somehow attain some of those things. Not everything, not those big ticket items, but still there's a comfort now that I don't have to fear and wait forever to plan for something. Now it's possible for me to kind of have something and acquire something and add it into my universe. And so as I think about how I grew up and I think about now the ability of being able to plan to have some of the things that I work very hard to obtain for, I find myself struggling with the concept of minimalism. And it's not because I don't respect the people that embrace it. It's just that I know what it's like for many years of my life, even into my 20s, when I couldn't afford to have much of anything and lived on very minimal things. I just find myself having a hard time to subscribe to the idea of voluntarily living without, if there are things that I want. Now, I'm going to say I don't necessarily, this isn't to say that I believe in and want and desire excess, because excess is a completely different idea. And I want to make sure that that's made clear from what I'm thinking about here. But I struggle with the idea that if I can get myself a couple of the small things that will give me some semblance of joy and satisfaction, then I should be entitled to have those and create that world that allows me to have that. Now, I'm going to say I don't, discredit, and I don't want to kind of conflate all of these kind of big kind of concepts, minimalism and excess and all this other stuff. I'm not trying to kind of be all that extreme. But for me, I do think that there's a value, me personally, in giving myself the ability to kind of get excited for a couple of the things that are worth kind of having and planning for, because I've earned them and because I feel like they are a personal reward for kind of living with the idea that I've had to work really hard and now I can kind of treat myself a little bit. I don't know if that is kind of maybe oversimplifying or maybe not truly taking to heart the idea of minimalism, but at its core, I do believe that if we kind of get to a point in our lives in which we work and we sacrifice and we give, we should allow ourselves the ability to kind of reap some of those benefits. And I think about the many years where I couldn't reap the benefits. And so now, that I feel like I've given myself a lot of air cover to kind of plan for those treats and those bonuses that make the hard work worth it. I'm good with that. So for me, it's much more about giving myself the time to really appreciate that I've worked and I've attained. And so it's not anti-minimalism, it's more of pro-rewarding yourself. An idea that really truly became important to me after the stroke and after I went through everything, because I realized that I had been so good at working that and saving and being mindful of where my money goes, but I wasn't even treating myself to give myself the ability to reap the benefit. And Lord knows, what if something would happen to me and I haven't given myself the ability to kind of allow myself tiny little rewards? So I guess all this is to say is that it's not anti-minimalism. It's more about the idea of rewarding and treating yourself, especially if you allow yourself to work really hard so that you can at least see those small benefits. I don't know. What are your thoughts on minimalism? Are you truly passionate about it? Why? Any other kind of thoughts that you think would be worth kind of highlighting? I would be really, really curious to kind of get your perspective. Please leave me some notes in the comments, and I will leave it there and see you at the next one.